has your work on that at all changed like your own personal hygiene habits? Like, do you buy, I mean, because Jeff and I use like Dr. Bronner's and like we're pretty like simple here. But I'm curious.
Yeah. I had known that phthalates were like associated with things for like a long time, but once I started like writing the paper and like reading the reviews papers in the sense of like writing the paper, I had this day where I was just like, and I just like threw it like everything, which I sometimes I do. And I started using like the solid bars of shampoo and conditioner because I feel like for me, like that was the thing that I think I was exposed to a lot of phthalates, and I try to be like more mindful of using plastics, but it's so hard because they're like everywhere. And I mean, that's part of the thing is like we need to find like healthy ways to like interact and like use these products because we can't do without them. There's a lot of medical supplies, but yeah, I try to like cut them where I can.
Totally. I think that's such an important thing to kind of recognize. Like, there's a lot of these products that so many of us use and kind of expect ourselves to use. And I think it really comes from this, like, not to get like, I don't know, outside of the science, but like the capitalist, like consumer mentality of like needing to sell us like more and more products. And like the reality is, there's so many ingredients in these products that we still don't have a great understanding of. And I think down the road, as scientists like you who are striving to understand the molecular impact of some of these ingredients, we can really like know what we should have weeded out. Like I think of like the ethidium bromide example of how they used to stain meat red with ethidium bromide, and then they found out that it causes cancer, and so now we know. Now we know. But there's presumably like less extreme versions of that we are, exposed to on a daily basis potentially. So I find that really interesting.
So I think it's interesting, like how like learning like what is like associated with things and just like generally like trying to be more mindful. But it's hard to cut these things out entirely. And the interesting thing about phthalates is like there are many, many different chemical compounds. And in the analysis that I'm doing, we're looking at like all the different types. And it's kind of interesting because my best friend from high school is she's a chemical engineer and she works with like a lot of plastic. Like she doesn't work with like soft plastics, she works with like hard plastics, but it's interesting talking to her about how they put them together and how they're so important. And there's like many different versions, there's many different ways you can make them, and they're all like a little bit different. So kind of asking like which ones matter. And using the molecular data, you can kind of see it. So
interesting.
Exciting for that paper to come out.
Yeah, I think plastics are so interesting because they've also really revolutionized like the type of science I do, for instance, with consumable pipette tips and plastic flasks and things like that. It's allowed us to grow cells in the lab sterilely and do a lot of important science, but we also produce like so much plastic waste as a result. And I usually feel so guilty, like the bags of plastic that I go through in the lab. Like no amount of like beeswax paper things in the home is going to make up for like the amount of plastic damage I do in the lab.
Yeah, I remember thinking that too when I was doing lab work, because I was isolating like DNA and RNA from like hundreds of samples, and I would just like have like a box of pipette tips and just go through them in like 2 hours, and it's
kind of the catch-22 of biomedical research. But hopefully I know a lot of companies actually are trying to move towards greener products. Rainin, for instance, they make pipette tips in recyclable containers now. And I think people are trying to become more aware of the kind of environmental consequences of our field and what we do, but I think it's still got a ways to go. So hopefully it gets a little bit more environmentally friendly, but
yeah, absolutely.